What's happening, guys? Welcome back. So it's time to get this K100 rebuild all finished up. So let's go ahead and go through some of the tools we'll be using, some of the parts we'll be installing, and then we'll just go ahead and get started. So as far as tools go, you're going to need a torque wrench, you're going to need some feeler gauges. I've got these two IAME specific tools right here that we'll use for the bearings and then for the crank seals. I've got all the new gaskets over here, new plug, new piston pin, new small cage. I've got a new clutch front drive sprocket here as well. The one on there is a little bit worn. You're also going to need a gasket maker, and this is the gasket maker I like to use. I'm pretty sure you could probably use whatever you want, but this is the one I use. You're going to need some Loctite, you're going to need some retaining compound, and then thread locker right there. Got a little rattle gun here just to make things a little quicker. And if I didn't mention torque wrench, you're going to need a torque wrench when we put the case bolts back in. And you're also going to need a dial indicator so that we can measure the axial clearance once we get the engine or the crank put back in the bottom end. So I'll go through how to measure that as well. But that's pretty much it, guys. So first thing I'm going to do is get the bearings put into the case, and then we'll take our axial clearance measurements. And this is one of those things that after you get these bearings put back in, if you go and measure your clearance and it's off, you have to pull the bearing out in order to put a spacer in or remove a spacer depending on what you've got in there. So that kind of sucks when that happens, but there it all is, guys. Let's go ahead and get started. So when I took the bearings out, I heated the case up from the outside just to try to keep as much heat off the bearing as possible so the bearing stays cooler than the case so it falls out a little bit easier. But when I go to put the bearings back in, I'm going to heat it up from the inside just to get a little more direct heat right in here where the bearing's going to sit to help that slide in a little bit better. And you'll see some videos, some guys that when they're doing their case bearings, they'll put the bearing in the freezer. That's what I did at first, and you know, I don't see anything wrong with it, but I've since been doing it without it, and the bearings fall in the exact same way. So I see no need to go ahead and throw the bearings in the freezer to get them cold. If you get the case heated up enough, the bearings will slide right in for you. Okay, so if you had spacers in there, make sure you go ahead and get those back in. Spacers just sit flat down in there. Let's see if we can drop this bearing in. And you want to try to drop this in as straight as you can, because if you go in crooked, it will seize up on you. Then you have to bang it out. Just like that. Bearing falls straight in, and then what I like to do is I get this same IAME tool that I used when I tapped the bearing out, and I just set it down there on the bearing just to help it keep it down, seated all the way in. And another thing you'll notice is the bearings look different from one side to the other. So this is the side of the bearing you want facing outwards, and then this is the side of the bearing you want on the facing inwards towards the crank. So just make sure when you put them in there, you put them in there correctly. But we've got this one done. And I'll just keep that tool on there till it cools down a little bit, just to ensure that it's seated all the way in. So the case is 126 degrees. Let's see if that's hot enough. Just try to drop this guy down in here. Just like that. So pretty simple job getting your case bearings back in. So I'm gonna have to let these just chill here for a minute, cool down to about room temperature. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna dry fit the crank, and then we'll check our axial clearance. All right, so my cases are nice and cool. So what I'm gonna do is put the crank in here, and then I'm just gonna put 4 screws in, snug them up, and then we're going to line the crank up with the dial indicator so we can measure our axial clearance. And we want to do this before we get our gasket maker on here, just in case we have to pull it apart if our measurement isn't right and we've got to pull bearings out. It'll just keep things a little cleaner, and you're not going to have to deal with a bunch of gasket maker if you do have to pull these apart after you check this measurement. I'm just going to put 4 screws in, essentially in the corners. All right. So let's try to get this lined up with our dial indicator. And we're trying to measure how far back and forth the crank moves inside the case. You can hear there's a little bit of play in there, and that's definitely something you do want. So let's get this pressed up against the indicator. And it doesn't necessarily matter where you start, but when we move it back and forth, we want to see how far back and forth it's moving. So if you see right there, I'm pushed all the way in and I'm at 70. Pull it back toward this side and it's down to 40. So I've got about 0.03 of a millimeter axial play, and the rebuild guide says you want between 25 hundredths and 35 hundredths of a millimeter. So we're right there in the middle, so we're good to go. So I'm going to pull these screws back out, and then we'll get the gasket sealer on there, and we'll get this thing closed up. Okay guys, so I like to start and put the gasket maker on this half of the crankcase. This half, you'll notice, has the alignment dowels, and it just makes it a little harder to work around if you try to put the gasket maker on this side. So I put it on this side, and I'm going to say less is more when you do this. You don't want to put a ton on here, because once you press them together or tighten them together, the gasket seal will squirt out, and you don't want to get a ton of gasket maker on the inside of your case here. So less is definitely more. So let me go ahead and get some applied, and then I'll show you how we get it spread out, and then we'll just go ahead and put this thing back together. Alright, so once we got some gasket seal on there, all I'm going to do is just spread it around with my finger, kind of just blot it to get it all nice and smoothed out. And you can wipe your finger off every so often if you've got a little excess. Make sure you get around all the screw holes. Alright, got a nice thin coat. Just like that. So let's go ahead and put this back together, and then we're going to use the torque wrench, and I believe the setting you're going to want to use is 10 Newton meters, and it's a pretty light, so you don't have to torque these things down extremely hard to get this case sealed back up. And there's 3 screws that are longer, and then there's 5 screws that are a little shorter. The longer ones go up here and then right here, and then the 5 shorter ones will obviously go in the other holes. And then I just give them a little snug with the ratchet. Alright, and then we're going to want to get our torque wrench. And when you torque these down, you know, try to go in like an X pattern. You don't want to just go all the way around in a circle. So kind of an X pattern, just like you do on anything else. Like I said, 10 Newton meters isn't a whole lot of torque. All right, and once you've got them all, just double check. Never hurts to double check. Just like that, guys. There's going to be a little bit of gasket maker that squirts out here up to the top. Go ahead and wipe off. And then there'll be a little bit that'll show up in the intake as well. You can get wiped off. Just like that, guys. So the next thing we'll do is let's get our crank seals put in. So to do that, I've got a couple of foam blocks down here. So I like to use the set the case on, and then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put a little gasket maker around the outside edges of your seals, so when you put those into the case, that helps seal that up a little bit. And you're also going to want to get a little oil And we'll squirt some oil in here. Take my oil cans out, of course. Yes, I can show you guys what oil I'm using. This is the oil I use. Of course, that's a brand new one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squirt some oil down here into the bearing and then get a little bit on the crank to help the seal slide over it. Just get some oil around the edge of the crank, like so. Then I'm just going to put some gasket maker around the edge of the bearing, or the seal, excuse me. You don't need a ton, then just spread it around with your finger. Just like that. And then what I've got is I've got this IAME tool, and what this does is it allows me to set this right over the top and then press the seal down in there. I mean, I've seen guys, you can use big sockets or whatever, but the right tools make the job just a whole lot easier. And having the right tool also helps it so you don't push it in too far or crooked. Clean up any excess sealant. And there's our perfectly installed crank seal. So I'm just going to flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. just like that. And that's going to help keep the case airtight. Just like that. So I'm going to cruise through the next little bit just because I covered pretty much all of that in the video I did, top end KA rebuild. So I'm just going to cruise through the rest of this, get the piston in, get the cylinder on, and then we'll go ahead, we'll get our ring gear installed, we'll get the starter installed, and then our reed cage. Alright, so piston's installed, got the head on, so now we don't have to worry about damaging anything if the crank spins while we're working here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get the starter put back on, and then we'll get the ring gear back on in the clutch. Alright, so before we get the ring gear on, we got to get the Bendix in there or else you won't be able to get that back in. So when you get ready to install your Bendix, you're going to want to give it a little bit of grease. This is one of those things that unless you tear your ring gear all the way off, you're not going to be able to get to on a regular basis. So I like to make sure it's nice and greased up. And you know, I've actually been using some tri-flow grease, but I can't find it anywhere. Not sure where it went. You don't want a ton in here, just enough. I've also got this little tri-flow dropper bottle, and I like to drop some tri-flow down in here as well, just a couple drops. Just go ahead and slide that back in. And this grease is great, Maxima racing grease. But I've been using that tri-flow stuff and I really like it. Not sure where it went. Alright, so after our Bendix is installed, we can get our ring gear on. And I'm not sure, I think it's called a taper lock. So this has a taper lock on it, so there's no keyway. So that's why you need the retaining compound to help that taper lock hold the ring gear on. And the recommended stuff is the 641 Loctite. And all you'll do is just drip a little bit in here. Spread it around with your finger. We'll go ahead and get our ring gear set on here. Just like that. Then we've got the ring gear nut, and you'll want to drop just a teeny bit of blue Loctite on the threads of your ring gear bolt, just like that, just a teeny little bit. And remember, this is reverse threaded, so it's going to be backwards to get it on. And I don't think I mentioned in the first video, this is a 27mm socket. And what I do is I just hold it with my thumb and then zip it on. Just like that. Alright, now we can get our clutch on here. So on the back of the clutch, there's going to be a little centering dowel. And you'll see that that will go right here. So we'll get this on. Like that. Bit of blue Loctite on these guys. And you can actually put this clutch on the ring gear before you get it installed on the engine. then just like the case bolts, these bolts also need to be torqued down to 10 Newton meters. So I get my little ring gear holder, put that guy in there. We'll torque these guys. Like that. All right. Go ahead and get your Bendix cover on. Just lightly snug these up. It's just holding on to plastic, so you're not going to need much torque at all. All right, let's go ahead and get our clutch back on here. So we've got this little washer, we've got a little O-ring, and then we've got the cage. So the washer, you're going to notice on the one side of it, it's got like a little, just a little groove cut into it so that it can slide over the little bevel of the crank. It's going to be hard to see, but you'll notice it once you pull it off, so you'll know which way it goes back on. You're going to want that little angle on the inside of your washer towards the engine. Then you put your O-ring on. And then your bearing, you're going to want to give your bearing some grease. This is another place where I've been using that tri-flow grease, but this stuff's good as well. Go ahead and grease this guy up. And you know, I was going to replace this sprocket, but I'm going to go ahead and keep this one on here. And then for the first couple practices next year, I'm just going to run this one that's got a little bit of wear on it, and then I'll replace it brand new for the first race. Like that. Washer, and then the nut. And you don't want to crank this thing down too hard, but you obviously want it on there. So I just get my rattle gun, give it a couple quick pulls, and call it good. Just like that. Let's go ahead and get this stator put on. So hopefully you didn't lose your little key. You're gonna want to put your key in there. And then you'll go ahead and slide the stator over the top of it. And you're going to want to kind of try to look behind it and make sure that the key doesn't flip up as you try to slide this thing on. And it could be kind of tricky just because this thing's magnetic and it likes to pull up the key. Washer's back over the stator. And now we can zip this guy back on. Same thing with the clutch, just a couple of quick zips. And you can just hold the ring gear on the other side with your fingertips. Then just zip this guy back on. Just like that. You know, so real quick, so if you use the factory or the gasket that the exhaust gasket that you get from IAME, one side doesn't have lettering and the other side does. If you put the lettering side toward the engine, I find that this will stick to the engine when you take the exhaust off or the exhaust header off. But if you put it on with the letters out, it'll stick to the header, and it's just a ton easier to pick off the header than it is off the back of the engine. Okay guys, engine build is complete. Ready for next year. So I hope that was informative. I hope I was able to explain everything enough. So you may have noticed that I did not put the ignition back on. I'm going to go ahead and do a video and show you guys how to set your ignition timing. I figure that's probably a good video as well. So I'm going to do a complete separate video just on setting the ignition timing. Not really part of the engine rebuild, but that's why that is not on. So I can just record a quick video and show you guys how to set your ignition timing. But there it is. Pretty simple job, guys. So as always, I definitely appreciate you guys for watching. Hopefully that information helps you if you decide you want to rebuild your own engine. There are a lot of specific tools you do want to get if you want to do the job right. That's probably why a lot of guys won't do like the bottom end and stuff themselves. But for the top end, a hone's really not that much. You could invest in a hone if you were just rebuilding your own engines, and I think it would definitely be worth your while. But once you get into the bottom end tools like the crank jig and a few other things, it can get kind of spendy. So you may want to send your engine off if you need some bottom end work done, and I'm always here to help. So as always, appreciate you for tuning in. Plan your race, race your plan. Have a good time at the track.